Hey everyone! Welcome back to my channel where we dive deep into the classics that shaped cinema as we know it. Today, I want to talk to you about a film that's not just a movie. It's a masterpiece that grabs you by the collar and doesn't let go. I'm talking about 12 Angry Men from 1957. If you haven't seen it yet, trust me, you're missing out on one of the most powerful, thought-provoking experiences ever put on screen. And if you have, well, stick around because we're going to unpack every little detail about this gem, from its humble beginnings to its lasting impact. I'll be your guide through this journey, sharing why this film deserves a spot on your must-watch list, all without giving away any spoilers, because I want you to discover its magic for yourself. Let me start by painting a picture for you. Imagine a film that's almost entirely set in one room with 12 guys just talking. Sounds boring, right? Wrong. This movie turns that simple setup into a riveting exploration of human nature, justice, and the power of doubt. It's the kind of story that makes you question everything, and by the end, you'll be reflecting on your own beliefs. That's why you need to watch it. It's not just entertainment. It's a mirror to society that still feels incredibly relevant today, over 6 decades later. In a world full of blockbuster explosions and CGI spectacles, 12 Angry Men reminds us that great storytelling comes from raw emotion, sharp dialogue, and brilliant performances. It's proof that less can be so much more. Now let's rewind to how this film came to be. It all started with a teleplay written by Reginald Rose, then a talented screenwriter who drew inspiration from his own experience serving on a jury in a manslaughter case. Rose was fascinated by the dynamics of group decision-making and how personal biases can influence justice. He first brought this idea to life as a live television drama on CBS's Studio One in 1954, titled 12 Angry Men. The teleplay starred actors like Robert Cummings and Franchot Tone, and it was directed by Franklin J. Schaffner. It aired on September 20, 1954, and received critical acclaim for its tense atmosphere and insightful commentary. Rose's script was so compelling that it caught the eye of Hollywood, leading to its adaptation into a feature film. Enter Henry Fonda, the legendary actor known for his roles in films like The Grapes of Wrath and Mr. I'm Roberts. Fonda was so passionate about the project that he co-produced it through his own production company, Orion Nova Productions, which he formed specifically for this film with Reginald Rose. This was Fonda's first venture into producing, and he took a huge risk by deferring his salary to help get the movie made. He believed in the story's message so deeply that he was willing to bet on it. The film was directed by Sidney Lumet, who was making his feature film debut after a successful career in television directing. Lumet, born in Philadelphia in 1924, had honed his skills on shows like You Are There and Danger, and he brought a fresh, innovative approach to cinema. At just 33 years old, Lumet was eager to prove himself, and 12 Angry Men became his calling card. Production kicked off in the summer of 1956 in New York City. The film was shot primarily at Fox Studios in Manhattan, with some exterior scenes filmed around the Foley Square courthouse to set the scene. The entire shoot lasted only 19 days. Yes, you heard that right, just under 3 weeks, which is astonishingly short for a feature film, even by 1950s standards. This tight schedule was partly due to the limited budget, which was a modest $340,000. That's peanuts compared to today's multi-million-dollar epics, but it forced the team to be creative and efficient. Fonda and Rose put up much of the financing themselves, and United Artists distributed the film. To keep costs down, they rehearsed extensively for 2 weeks before filming, treating it almost like a stage play. This rehearsal period allowed the actors to build chemistry and dive deep into their characters, which shines through in every frame. Speaking of the cast, oh man, this ensemble is a dream team of character actors who deliver performances that are nothing short of electric. Henry Fonda stars as Juror 8, the architect who's calm, principled, and stands as the voice of reason. Fonda, with his everyman charm and moral gravitas, was perfect for the role. He turned down bigger paychecks to make this film because he felt it was important. Opposite him is Lee J. Cobb as Juror 3, the hot-tempered antagonist whose intensity could light up the screen. Cobb, a veteran of stage and screen with credits in On the Waterfront and Death of a Salesman, brings a raw power that's unforgettable. Then there's E.G. Marshall as Juror 4, the logical stockbroker, played with cool precision. Marshall was known for his work in television and later became famous for The Defenders. The jury is rounded out by an incredible supporting cast. Jack Klugman as Juror 5, the young man from the slums who drew from his own background growing up in Philadelphia. Edward Binns as Juror 6, the honest house painter. Jack Warden as Juror 7, the impatient salesman who's more concerned with his baseball tickets. Warden's comic timing adds just the right touch of levity. Joseph Sweeney as Juror 9, the wise elderly man, reprising his role from the original teleplay. Ed Begley as Juror 10, the bigoted garage owner, delivering a performance that's chilling in its authenticity. George Voskovec as Juror 11, the European watchmaker with a strong sense of democracy. Robert Weber as Juror 12, the slick advertising executive. And finally, Martin Balsam as Juror 1, the foreman trying to keep order, and John Fiedler as Juror 2, the meek bank clerk with that distinctive high-pitched voice you might recognize from The Bob Newhart Show or voicing Piglet in Winnie the Pooh. What makes this cast so special is how each actor embodies a distinct personality, representing different facets of American society in the 1950s. They weren't big stars at the time, except for Fonda and maybe Cobb, but their collective talent creates a symphony of clashing egos and revelations. Lumet cast them carefully, drawing from New York theater actors who could handle the demanding, dialogue-heavy script. Interestingly, all the jurors are referred to only by their numbers, not names, which adds to the universality of the story. The only named characters are minor ones, like the judge played by Rudy Bond and the guard by James Kelly. Behind the camera, the crew was equally talented. The screenplay was adapted by Reginald Rose himself from his teleplay, expanding it slightly for the big screen while keeping the core intact. Cinematographer Boris Kaufman, who won an Oscar for On the Waterfront, used black and white film to capture the claustrophobic tension. Kaufman employed innovative techniques like gradually lowering the camera angles and using wider lenses as the film progresses to make the room feel smaller and more oppressive. This visual storytelling enhances the emotional intensity without relying on special effects. The editing was handled by Carl Lerner, who kept the pacing taut, clocking in at just 96 minutes, short and sweet but packed with substance. The music, composed by Kenyon Hopkins, was minimalistic, featuring a subtle jazz score that underscores key moments without overwhelming the dialogue. Hopkins, known for his work in television, created a theme that's haunting and reflective. The film's art direction by Robert Markel and set decoration transformed a simple jury room into a character itself. Sweaty, stuffy, with a broken fan and pouring rain outside, all contributing to the mounting pressure. Now, why should you watch this? Because it's a masterclass in suspense built purely through conversation. No car chases, no explosions, just words that cut like knives. It challenges you to think about prejudice, peer pressure, and the responsibility of citizenship. In today's divided world, where echo chambers and quick judgments dominate, 12 Angry Men is a timely reminder of the importance of reasonable doubt and empathy. It's the kind of film that sparks discussions long after the credits roll, perfect for movie nights with friends or family where you can debate its themes. Let's talk about the release and reception. 12 Angry Men premiered on April 10, 1957 in Los Angeles and had its wider release shortly after. Initially, it wasn't a box office smash. It grossed about $1 million domestically, which barely covered costs plus marketing. Critics, however, loved it. Bosley Crowther of the New York Times praised its tight, absorbing drama, and Variety called it a powerfully tense film. It earned 3 Academy Award nominations: Best Picture, Best Director for Lumet, and Best Adapted Screenplay for Rose. Though it lost to The Bridge on the River Kwai in those categories, the noms put it on the map. At the Berlin International Film Festival, it won the Golden Bear, the highest prize, beating out international competition. Over time, its reputation grew. In 2007, the American Film Institute ranked it as the 87th greatest American film of all time in their 10th anniversary list. It's also number 2 on their list of top 10 courtroom dramas. The Library of Congress selected it for preservation in the National Film Registry in 2007, recognizing its cultural, historical, and aesthetic significance. Rotten Tomatoes gives it a perfect 100% score from critics, with an audience score of 97%. That's as close to unanimous praise as you can get. But let's dig into some fun trivia and behind-the-scenes details, because this film is full of them. For starters, the entire movie was filmed in sequence, which is rare, allowing the actors' fatigue to mirror their characters' exhaustion. By the end, they were genuinely sweaty and disheveled, no makeup needed. Henry Fonda reportedly hated watching himself on screen and walked out of the premiere after just 20 minutes. Sidney Lumet encouraged improvisation in rehearsals, but stuck closely to the script during filming to maintain the rhythm. The jury room set was built to be functional. The table was 20 feet long and the walls were movable for camera setups. The rainstorm outside was created with water hoses and fans for wind effects. One quirky fact: the knives used in the film were real switchblades, which were illegal in New York at the time, so they had to be handled carefully. Also, Jack Klugman, who played Juror 5, based his character's nervousness on his own jury experience, adding authenticity. The film's black and white format wasn't just a budgetary choice. It enhances the stark moral contrasts. Lumet later said he chose it to focus on the characters' faces and expressions. Interestingly, there was a colorized version released in the 1980s, but purists prefer the original monochrome. Influence-wise, 12 Angry Men has inspired countless adaptations and homages. There's a 1997 remake for television starring Jack Lemmon and George C. Scott, directed by William Friedkin. Stage versions have been performed worldwide, including a Broadway production in 2004 with Boyd Gaines and Philip Bosco. It's been parodied on shows like The Simpsons and Saturday Night Live, and referenced in films like JFK and The Dark Knight. Internationally, there are remakes in Russia, 12 in 2007, India, Ek Ruka Hua Faisla in 1986, and even China. Why does it endure? Because at its heart, it's about the human condition, the flaws, the strengths, the capacity for change. It shows how one person's conviction can shift the tide, encouraging viewers to stand up for what's right, even when it's unpopular. In an era of social media trials and instant verdicts, it urges patience and critical thinking. Let's not forget the technical achievements. The sound design by James A. Gleason captures every sigh, every chair scrape, immersing you in the room. Costumes by Robert Swink were simple, suits and ties that get progressively rumpled, symbolizing the breakdown of order. Production challenges included the heat. New York summers are brutal, and with lights on set, temperatures soared over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Actors like Ed Begley, who was in his 50s, struggled but powered through. Lumet used this to his advantage, letting the discomfort fuel the performances. Reginald Rose's script is a marvel, tight, with no wasted words. He expanded the teleplay by adding more backstory through dialogue, making characters feel real without exposition dumps. Rose went on to write for shows like The Twilight Zone and won Emmys, but this remains his crowning achievement. Henry Fonda's involvement extended beyond acting. He helped secure the deal with United Artists and even designed some promotional materials. Sadly, the film didn't turn a profit initially, and Fonda never saw a dime from it, but he considered it one of his proudest works. Critically, it's studied in law schools for its depiction of jury deliberation, highlighting issues like reasonable doubt under the U.S. legal system. It's also used in psychology classes to discuss group dynamics, conformity, think Asch experiments, and persuasion. Thematically, without spoiling, it tackles racism, classism, ageism, all woven subtly into the interactions. It's a commentary on the American dream, immigration, and post-war society, yet timeless. For film buffs, watch for Lumet's directing techniques. Long takes that build tension, close-ups that reveal inner turmoil, and editing that quickens the pulse. If you're into trivia, note that John Fiedler and Joseph Sweeney were the only actors from the original teleplay to reprise their roles. George Voskovich, an immigrant himself, brought authenticity to his character. The film's poster featured the tagline, "Life is in their hands, death is on their minds," which captures the stakes perfectly. In terms of legacy, it's influenced directors like Aaron Sorkin, and whose dialogue-driven works echo Rose's style. It's a staple in Best Films lists. IMDb rates it 9.0 out of 10, making it one of the highest-rated movies ever. So, why watch 12 Angry Men? Because it's cinema at its purest. Intelligent, emotional, and transformative. It proves that a great story, stellar acting, and visionary direction can create something eternal. Whether you're a casual viewer or a cinephile, this film will stay with you. Grab some popcorn, dim the lights, and let it challenge you. You won't regret it. Last time we left off talking about why 12 Angry Men from 1957 is an absolute must-watch, how it turns a single room and pure dialogue into edge-of-your-seat suspense, and why its themes of justice, bias, and standing alone still hit so hard today. But there's so much more to this film that makes it legendary. From the gritty production story to the genius behind the camera. So let's keep rolling and dive even deeper into every fascinating detail. So when you watch it, you'll appreciate just how much craft went into making something this powerful on such a shoestring. And remember, no spoilers here. I'm just hyping you up to experience it fresh. Let's pick up where we left off with the production itself. Picture this. It's 1956. New York City is sweltering in the summer heat, and this tiny crew is crammed into a soundstage at Fox Studios on Manhattan's West Side. The main set, the jury room, was built to be just 16 by 24 feet, super cramped, with movable walls so the cameras could squeeze in. They even had a broken fan in there for realism, and they used hoses and fans outside to simulate that pouring rain you hear pounding on the windows. And the heat wasn't just for show. With all those lights blazing, the room often hit over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Actors were literally sweating through their suits, and director Sidney Lumet used that real discomfort to amp up the performances. No need for fake sweat or makeup tricks. The shoot wrapped in an incredible 19 days, sometimes reported as 21, but Lumet himself said they finished a day under schedule and about $1,000 under budget. That's insane efficiency. They rehearsed for 2 full weeks beforehand, like a theater troupe, running lines over and over in that same tiny room without rolling film. Lumet wanted the actors to feel the exhaustion and frustration of being stuck together for hours. By the time cameras rolled, the tension was already baked in. And Henry Fonda later said the set looked like shit compared to the fancy Hitchcock stages he'd just come from on The Wrong Man. But that rawness worked perfectly. Now the cinematography. Oh man, this is where Boris Kaufman really shines. Kaufman, who won an Oscar for On the Waterfront, brought his realistic style to make the room feel alive and oppressive. He and Lumet planned every single shot in advance with a lens plot. They started the film with cameras high above eye level using wide-angle lenses, making the room seem spacious and the jurors distant from each other. As the arguments heat up, the camera drops to eye level. By the final third, it's mostly low angles, close-ups, and longer telephoto lenses that compress the space, making the walls feel like they're closing in. The ceiling starts appearing more in frames, heightening that claustrophobia. It's subtle genius, no flashy effects, just smart visuals that mirror the rising emotional pressure. Lumet called it turning a limitation into a dramatic strength. The editing by Carl Lerner keeps everything taut, with long takes in the beginning that let conversations breathe, then quicker cuts as tempers flare. The sound design captures every little detail, the scrape of chairs, heavy breathing, the fan struggling to turn, pulling you right into the room. Kenyon Hopkins' score is sparse, mostly subtle jazz cues that underscore tension without stealing focus from the words. The cast, as I mentioned before, is stacked with theater veterans who bring depth to every role. Henry Fonda as Juror 8 is the moral center, calm, thoughtful, but unshakable. Fun fact, this was the only film he ever produced, and he deferred his salary to get it made. He believed in it that much. Lee J. Cobb as Juror 3 delivers one of the most intense performances ever. His rage feels real because he was drawing from deep personal experience. E.G. Marshall is ice-cold logic as Juror 4, Martin Balsam the nervous foreman, John Fiedler the soft-spoken bank clerk. You know that voice from Piglet and Winnie the Pooh. Jack Klugman channeling his own slum upbringing for Juror 5. Edward Binns the straightforward painter. Jack Warden the impatient sports fan, adding comic relief. Joseph Sweeney the observant old man, reprising from the teleplay. Ed Begley the prejudiced garage owner whose bigotry is portrayed chillingly authentically. George Voskovich the immigrant watchmaker passionate about justice. And Robert Webber the slick ad man. 9 of the 12 jurors were played by World War II veterans, including Fonda, Navy, Cobb, Army Air Forces, and others, adding layers of authenticity to their portrayals of ordinary American men. Only 3 minutes of the film happen outside the jury room, the opening courtroom scene and the final exit down the steps. The rest? Pure confinement. Reginald Rose expanded his original teleplay slightly for the screen, adding more backstory through natural dialogue. no clunky exposition. He drew from his own 1954 jury service in a manslaughter case, fascinated by how personal prejudices could sway decisions. The film critiques the jury system subtly, especially in the McCarthy-era context of conformity and fear. Release-wise, it came out April 10, 1957, distributed by United Artists. Box office was modest, around $1 to $2 million in rentals, Maz barely breaking even after costs and ads. Fonda never got paid his full salary, but he called it one of his proudest achievements and reportedly walked out of the premiere after 20 minutes because he hated watching himself. Critics raved, though. Bosley Crowther in the New York Times called it powerfully tense. Variety praised its drama. It snagged 3 Oscar nods: Best Picture, losing to The Bridge on the River Kwai; Best Director for Lumet, his debut; and Best Adapted Screenplay for Rose. It won the Golden Bear at Berlin, a huge international honor. Legacy? Massive. In 2007, the Library of Congress added it to the National Film Registry for its cultural importance. AFI ranks it number 87 on their Greatest American Films list, and number 2 among courtroom dramas. IMDb users give it a near-perfect 9.0, often in the top 10 all time. On Rotten Tomatoes, 100% critics, 97% audience. It's studied in law schools for reasonable doubt, psychology classes for groupthink and conformity, even business seminars on persuasion and leadership. Remakes and influences abound. A 1997 TV version with Jack Lemmon as the holdout and George C. Scott as the antagonist, directed by William Friedkin. Stage plays worldwide. A 2004 Broadway revival. Bollywood's Ek Ruka Hua Faisla, 1986. Russia's 12, 2007, by Nikita Mikhalkov. Parodies on The Simpsons, references in The Dark Knight, JFK. Directors like Aaron Sorkin owe a debt to its sharp dialogue-driven style. More trivia gems. The switchblade prop was real and illegal in New York then. Careful handling required. The film was shot in sequence, so actors' growing fatigue matched the characters. Lumet encouraged rehearsals, but stuck to the script on set for rhythm. One epic 8-minute take with 18 camera moves took half a day to plan and 7 hours to light. The Department of Defense once banned it on military bases over a line questioning patriotism. Wild, right? Why does this 96-minute black and white film endure? Because it's about us, flawed people trying to do right in a pressure cooker. It shows one voice of reason can change minds. That doubt isn't weakness, but strength. In our fast judgment world, it's a call to slow down, listen, question. Watch it alone or with friends. It'll spark debates for hours. It's your narrator diving straight back in without missing a beat. We've already covered the heart and soul of 12 Angry Men, the insane production constraints, the masterful cinematography tricks, the powerhouse cast, and why this film's message still punches you in the gut in 2026. Now let's peel back even more layers. Things most casual viewers never notice, but that make rewatches so rewarding. I'll keep feeding you every juicy detail so your script feels packed, authentic, and ready to hook anyone listening. One thing that always blows my mind is how Sidney Lumet turned technical limitations into pure storytelling gold. Because the budget was so tight, around $343,000 according to most reliable production records, they couldn't afford multiple sets or big location shoots. So Lumet and cinematographer Boris Kaufman decided to make the jury room itself the villain. They literally angled every shot to squeeze the space tighter as the story progresses. Early on, you get wide establishing shots with plenty of headroom and breathing space between the men. By the midpoint, the camera is hugging their shoulders, and toward the climax, you're staring straight up their nostrils in tight close-ups with almost no headroom at all. The ceiling creeps into frame more and more, visually trapping everyone. It's one of the cleanest examples in film history of form follows content. The visuals literally mirror the psychological pressure building inside that room. Another genius move, the weather. That relentless rainstorm you hear hammering the windows isn't just background noise, it's a character. The thunder rolls right on cue during the most heated arguments, almost like nature is underlining the tension. They achieved it with garden hoses spraying water against the exterior set walls and big industrial fans blasting to simulate wind. No fancy CGI. On just old-school practical effects that cost almost nothing but add huge atmosphere. The broken fan inside the room? That was real too. They deliberately chose not to fix it, so the air would stay thick and uncomfortable. Actors have said the heat from the lights combined with New York summer humidity made everyone genuinely irritable by day 3 or 4, which fed directly into the performances. You can actually see beads of real sweat on foreheads in some shots. No makeup department trickery needed. Let's talk about the knife, that iconic switchblade that becomes so central to the plot. The prop department had to source a real one because Lumet wanted the exact look and sound of the spring-loaded blades snapping open. Problem was, switchblades were classified as illegal weapons in New York State at the time, and so the production had to get special police permission and keep it locked up between takes. Jack Klugman, playing Juror 5, handles it with such nervous familiarity because he grew up around street kids in Philadelphia who carried similar knives. He later said he based a lot of his character's body language on guys he knew back then. Slouched posture, quick defensive twitches, adding layers of authenticity you feel even if you don't know the backstory. Henry Fonda's commitment deserves its own spotlight. This man was already a huge star, coming off classics like The Oxbow Incident and Hitchcock's The Wrong Man, yet he took no upfront salary for 12 Angry Men. He and Reginald Rose financed a big chunk themselves through their Orion Nova company, betting everything on the project. Then Fonda even helped cast some of the jurors by suggesting theater actors he respected. After principal photography wrapped, he reportedly told friends he felt this was the most important film he'd ever made, more than any big-budget picture. Yet when the movie underperformed at the box office initially, he never saw a profit share. Years later, he still called it one of the 2 or 3 films he was proudest of in his entire career. The opening courtroom sequence, those first 3 minutes outside the jury room, is shot so deliberately plain and procedural. No music, just the judge's monotone instructions, the bailiff's calls, the defendant's quiet presence in the background. Lumet wanted to establish the cold machinery of the justice system before we plunge into the hot-blooded human drama of the deliberation. Although it's a brilliant contrast, sterile formality giving way to sweaty, personal chaos. Reginald Rose's dialogue is surgical. Every line serves at least 2 purposes: revealing character, advancing the argument, planting doubt, or exposing prejudice. He avoided melodrama. Instead, he let small human moments do the heavy lifting. The old man Juror 9's quiet observation about feeling invisible in society, the immigrant Juror 11's passionate defense of democratic process, the advertising exec Juror 12's habit of flip-flopping with slick jargon, all feel painfully real because Rose based them on people he met during his own jury duty. He once said the teleplay and film were his attempt to show how fragile truth can be when 12 strangers with different lives are forced to agree on it. While the performances evolved in fascinating ways during those 2 weeks of rehearsal. Lee J. Cobb started off restrained, but Lumet encouraged him to let the anger build gradually. By the final takes, Cobb was so emotionally drained after his big outburst scenes that he needed time to recover between setups. Ed Begley, playing the bigoted Juror 10, drew from real attitudes he had witnessed growing up in the Midwest. His delivery of certain prejudiced lines is so matter-of-fact, it makes your skin crawl. Jack Warden brought natural humor as the baseball-obsessed Juror 7, lightening the mood just enough so the heavier moments hit harder. After the film wrapped, United Artists struggled to sell it. They marketed it as a tense courtroom thriller, but audiences in 1957 were hungry for Technicolor epics and musicals. Whenever it played in second-run theaters and drive-ins more than big downtown houses. Yet, word of mouth slowly built. College film societies started screening it, law professors showed clips in class, and European festivals gave it serious awards. Love. The Berlin Golden Bear win in 1957 was huge. It beat out films from France, Italy, and Sweden, putting American independent cinema on the international map. Fast forward, and the film's influence is everywhere. When you watch modern dialogue-heavy courtroom or ensemble pieces, The Social Network, The Big Short, Succession, you can trace the DNA back to Rose and Lumet. The way tension escalates through conversation rather than action became a blueprint. Even reality TV jury shows and debate formats borrow its rhythm unconsciously. And one last production nugget. The film was shot almost entirely in continuity order. That meant the actors' real growing exhaustion matched the characters. By the time they filmed the late scenes, everyone was tired, hungry, and ready to get out of that damn room. Just like the jurors. Lumet used long, unbroken takes in the final act to capture that raw fatigue. One famous take runs over 8 minutes with the camera moving fluidly around the table, half a day just to rehearse and light it. Your narrator here, still fired up about why 12 Angry Men from 1957 remains one of the greatest achievements in American cinema. We've already unpacked the sweat-soaked set, the shrinking camera angles, the real switchblade drama, and Fonda's all-in gamble. Now let's shift gears and talk about the deeper cultural fingerprints this film left behind. Ours the little Easter eggs that reward multiple viewings, and exactly how it speaks to the world we live in right now in 2026. One of the most powerful things about the movie is its refusal to name most of the characters. They're just juror 1 through 12. No last names, no deep backstories handed to you on a plate. That choice wasn't accidental. Reginald Rose wanted every viewer to project themselves or people they know onto these men. You start seeing your uncle in the impatient sports fan, your coworker in the logical businessman, maybe even yourself in the quiet observer who finally speaks up. It turns the jury box into a universal mirror. When you watch it today, you might catch yourself thinking, which one would I be in this room? That question alone makes the film timeless. The storm outside isn't random either. It starts heavy and chaotic, mirroring the initial group chaos, then gradually eases as minds begin to shift. By the time the final verdict comes, the rain has stopped, and you can almost feel the air clear. Lumet and the sound team layered those thunderclaps so precisely that they punctuate key emotional beats without ever feeling forced. It's like the weather is arguing right alongside the jurors. Another layer most people miss on first watch, the subtle class and ethnic tensions woven into the room. The youngest juror grew up rough and knows knives from the street. The immigrant watchmaker speaks with an accent and defends the system harder than anyone because he's seen what happens when it fails. The garage owner lets old prejudices spill out in ways that feel uncomfortably familiar even now. Now, DeRose didn't preach. He let these attitudes surface naturally through dialogue, so you feel the discomfort rather than being told about it. That restraint is what makes the film hit harder than 100 lecture scenes in other movies. Sidney Lumet's debut direction is a clinic in confidence. At 32 years old, he walked onto that set and treated every technical constraint like an opportunity. He later said in interviews that he learned more about filmmaking in those 19 days than in all his years of television. He never raised his voice on set, never lost his cool, even when the heat made everyone cranky. The actors trusted him completely because he trusted them to deliver. That mutual respect is why the performances feel so lived in. Let's talk about the knife demonstration scene, without giving anything away. It's one of the most famous moments in cinema history for a reason. The way it's staged, the camera placement, the silence that follows the action. It's pure tension built from stillness. Lumet rehearsed it for hours so the timing would feel organic. When you see it, notice how the entire room holds its breath. That's filmmaking at its most economical and most effective. The film's black and white choice wasn't just about saving money. Color would have softened the edges. Monochrome sharpens every facial tic, every bead of sweat, every flicker of doubt in the eyes. Boris Kaufman's lighting is harsh and unflinching. Hard shadows across faces when anger rises, softer fill when reason starts to win. It's visual psychology. In the decades since, scholars and critics have dissected it from every angle. Legal experts praise how accurately it portrays reasonable doubt as the cornerstone of the American justice system. Psychologists point to it as a textbook example of minority influence, how one consistent dissenter can crack group conformity. Sociologists use it to discuss implicit bias and how social status affects who gets heard. Even management trainers screen it to teach negotiation and active listening. That's Range, one 96-minute film feeding so many different fields. And the emotional payoff? It's earned. The movie never rushes the change of heart. It lets doubt creep in slowly, one small revelation at a time. You feel the weight of each shift because you've watched every argument, every hesitation, every flare-up. By the end, when certain jurors stand a little taller or look a little smaller, it's not melodramatic. It's human. If you're watching with friends or family, try this. After the credits roll, don't talk right away. Just sit with it for a minute. Then ask everyone, if you were in that room on the first vote, which way would you have gone and why? The conversation that follows will probably be one of the best you've had in a while. One more small but brilliant detail: the foreman's nervous habit of fiddling with objects on the table, pencils, glasses, whatever's in front of him. It's such a subtle tell of his anxiety about leading 12 strong personalities. Martin Balsam plays it so naturally, you almost don't notice it until a second viewing. The final walk down the courthouse steps, no big speeches, no swelling music, just quiet satisfaction and a return to normal life. It's understated perfection. Lumet knew the real drama was inside the room. And everything after is exhale. So here we are. I've given you the budget breakdowns, the shot-by-shot techniques, the actor backstories, the real-world inspirations, the awards, the legacy, the trivia, and the reason this film still feels urgent in 2026. 12 Angry Men isn't just a classic. It's a living argument for patience, empathy, courage, and the hard work of seeking truth. When you press play, turn off your phone, sit in a dark room, and let it pull you in. Feel the temperature rise, hear the rain, watch 12 strangers become something more than the sum of their parts. Then tell me it didn't move you. We're still rolling on this epic deep dive into 12 Angry Men. Your narrator keeping the energy high because this film just keeps giving the more you look at it. By now you've got the production grit, the visual mastery, and the cast chemistry, the real-world stakes, and why it feels urgent even today. Let's push further into the quieter, more reflective corners that make it a film you don't just watch, you live with afterward. Consider the pacing. At 96 minutes, it's lean, but it never feels rushed or padded. The first act establishes the room and the initial vote with deliberate slowness, long, unbroken shots letting you absorb the boredom and routine of jury duty. Then, as Juror 8 plants that first seed of doubt, the rhythm subtly shifts. Conversations overlap, interruptions increase, voices rise and fall like real arguments do. Lumet uses silence as a weapon too. Those moments when no one speaks, when the weight of what's been said hangs in the air, are some of the loudest parts of the movie. You feel the hesitation, the second-guessing, mocks the internal wrestling. It's masterful restraint. The film's moral architecture is built on layers of doubt rather than certainty. It never declares one side purely heroic or villainous. Every juror has a reason for their position, rooted in something personal. Grief, fear, pride, experience, exhaustion. Even the most stubborn characters aren't cartoon bad guys. They're human beings carrying their own unseen burdens. That complexity is what elevates it beyond a simple good versus prejudice story. It asks you to understand why people cling to wrong ideas and why letting go can feel like betrayal of self. One detail that hits harder on repeat viewings: the way personal stories leak out almost accidentally. A casual remark about family, a flash of memory about childhood, a bitter comment about society, they're dropped like breadcrumbs. But never forced. These fragments humanize everyone. You start to see that the loudest voices often hide the deepest insecurities, and the quietest ones sometimes carry the clearest insight. It's a reminder that behind every vote is a whole life story we only glimpse. The ending sequence, without spoiling the outcome, deserves its own appreciation. After all the shouting and sweat, the resolution arrives quietly. Men file out one by one, some with a nod, some with averted eyes, some changed forever. No grand speeches, no triumphant music cue, just ordinary footsteps on stairs, rain-cleared streets, and life resuming. That understatement is devastating in the best way. It respects the audience enough to let the emotional release come from within rather than from Hollywood orchestration. In terms of historical context, 1957. America was still grappling with post-war conformity, McCarthyism's lingering shadow, civil rights tensions bubbling under the surface, and a jury system that wasn't always as fair as the myth suggested. Rose and Lumet didn't shout about these issues. They let them emerge through character. The film quietly challenges the idea that 12 good men automatically deliver justice. It shows how easily the system can fail when empathy is absent and haste takes over. Watching it now in an era of polarized opinions and instant digital verdicts, those questions feel even sharper. For anyone studying acting, this is required viewing. The ensemble proves you don't need monologues or big gestures to create unforgettable characters. A raised eyebrow, a clenched fist on the table, now a sudden softening of the voice. These micro moments carry the weight. Fonda's steady calm isn't passive, it's active restraint, a choice that radiates strength. Cobb's volatility isn't over the top, it's earned through buildup. Every actor is playing a different instrument, yet they harmonize perfectly. If you're recording this for your video, lean into the intimacy. Tell your viewers to watch it in one sitting, no pauses if possible. The cumulative pressure is part of the experience. Suggest they notice their own breathing. Does it quicken during certain arguments? Do they find themselves leaning forward? That's the film working its magic on a physical level. Another gem, the film's influence on modern bottle episodes in television. Shows like The Bear, Succession, or even single-location thrillers owe a debt to how Lumet proved you can sustain 90-plus minutes of tension with nothing but people in conflict. No need for constant cuts or spectacle, just truth colliding with truth. One final production whisper, the Criterion Collection release includes a fantastic audio commentary by Lumet from the late 90s. If you get the disc or the digital version, listen to it after your first watch. He talks about every choice, the lens choices, the heat, the rehearsals, with the enthusiasm of someone who still loves the film decades later. It's like getting a masterclass from the man himself. So, wrap your head around this. A low-budget, black and white, talkie film from 1957 routinely ranks above multi-million-dollar blockbusters on all-time lists because it dares to trust its audience. It trusts us to care about ideas, to feel uncomfortable, to question ourselves. In a streaming world full of distractions, 12 Angry Men demands attention and rewards it tenfold. We're not slowing down yet. Your narrator still has more to share on why 12 Angry Men deserves every minute of your attention and every second of your script. We've explored the craft, the context, the performances, the legacy. Now let's zoom in on the philosophical heartbeat that keeps this film beating strong decades later, plus a few overlooked nuances that turn casual viewers into lifelong fans. At its core, this is a film about the courage required to say not guilty when everyone else is screaming the opposite. Not because you're contrarian, but because certainty feels too easy, too dangerous. Juror 8 doesn't start with proof. He starts with a question mark. That single act of intellectual humility sets everything in motion. The movie argues without ever preaching that real justice begins in uncertainty. It celebrates the discomfort of doubt as the birthplace of truth. In a culture that often rewards quick conviction and punishes second thoughts, that's a quietly radical stance. Watch how power shifts in the room without anyone raising a fist or pulling rank. It moves through persuasion, through small concessions, through one man refusing to budge until another sees something new. No one wins by dominating. They win by listening until the other side can't ignore the cracks in their own logic anymore. And it's a masterclass in non-coercive influence, something we could all use more of when conversations turn heated online or at the dinner table. The age range of the jurors matters too. You have a teenager, middle-aged men, an elderly man nearing the end of his life. Their perspectives clash not just on the case, but on what life has taught them about trust, fairness, and second chances. The oldest juror in particular brings a gentle wisdom born from invisibility. He knows what it's like to be dismissed because of age, and that lived experience becomes a turning point. It's subtle, but it reminds us that every generation carries blind spots the others can illuminate if we let them. Another layer that reveals itself slowly. The film is quietly anti-authoritarian in the best sense. It doesn't trust blind deference to majority opinion or to common sense, or even to eyewitness testimony without scrutiny. It insists that truth must be interrogated, no matter who delivers it or how confidently. That skepticism isn't cynicism, it's responsibility. The movie hands the burden of proof back to the viewer and says, you decide if this process was fair. You decide if justice was served. We're still deep in the trenches with 12 Angry Men, and honestly, the more I think about this film, the more layers keep revealing themselves, like it's designed to unfold new meaning every single time you return to it. Let's keep building on that momentum with some fresh angles that will give your video even more emotional weight and intellectual punch, all without circling back to what we've already covered. Think about the film's relationship to silence. In a story built almost entirely on dialogue, the pauses are where the real drama lives. There are moments when a juror hesitates before speaking, or when the whole table falls quiet after a particularly sharp revelation. Those silences aren't empty. They're loaded with unspoken regret, dawning realization, or stubborn refusal to yield. Lumet lets them breathe. He doesn't cut away or fill them with score. He trusts the audience to feel the discomfort, the internal churn. It's one of the reasons the movie feels so intimate. You're not just watching an argument, you're inside the awkward human gaps between words. Another thing that stands out is how the film treats memory as unreliable. Several jurors bring up personal anecdotes to support their views, stories from their own lives that they swear prove their point. Yet, as the discussion digs deeper, those memories start to fray at the edges. Details don't quite line up with reality. Emotions cloud the facts. Time distorts what really happened. The movie never calls anyone a liar outright, but it gently shows how our past shapes our present judgments in ways we don't always recognize. That's a profound idea. We don't just interpret evidence through who we are. We interpret our own lives the same way. The physicality of the space deserves another moment of appreciation. The long conference table isn't just furniture, it's a battlefield. Men lean across it to challenge each other, pull back when cornered, slam hands down when frustrated. One juror paces constantly, and another stays glued to his seat like it's an anchor. Their bodies tell stories their words sometimes try to hide. Watch how proximity changes. Early on, people keep distance, respecting personal space. Later, arguments push faces inches apart. That gradual erosion of boundaries mirrors the erosion of certainty. It's body language as narrative, and it's done with zero exaggeration. For your narration, here's a powerful transition you can use. Slow your delivery a little, lower your tone, and say something like, "This isn't a film about heroes saving the day with brilliant speeches. It's about the slow, unglamorous work of one person deciding that maybe, just maybe, the easy answer isn't the right one. And then having the guts to say it out loud when the room wants nothing more than to move on." That kind of quiet defiance? That's rarer on screen than any explosion or chase. The movie also carries a subtle thread about fatherhood and generational wounds. Without getting explicit, you see hints of strained relationships, absent fathers, disappointed sons, men carrying resentment from their own upbringing. These aren't the main plot, but they color how certain jurors respond to the idea of a young defendant and an allegedly abusive parent. It adds another shade of tragedy, the cycle of pain that justice sometimes has to interrupt. Still locked in on 12 Angry Men, because every angle we uncover makes it feel even more essential. We've dug into the philosophy, the silences, the body language, the generational echoes. Now let's shine a light on some of the film's most evocative symbolic touches and subtle mechanics that turn it from great into unforgettable. Plus a few production whispers that add extra fire to your narration. Start with the fan on the ceiling, the one that's broken and sputtering from the start. It's more than set dressing. Early in the deliberation, it barely turns, mirroring the group's stuck, overheated mindset. As votes slowly flip and fresh air of reason begins to circulate, notice how the fan starts moving more freely right around the moment the tally hits 6-6. It's a tiny, mechanical heartbeat syncing with the human one in the room. The storm outside eases too, but that fan's gradual revival is pure visual poetry. Progress isn't dramatic thunder. Sometimes it's a rusty blade finally catching wind. Then there's the architecture of Juror 8 himself. Henry Fonda's character is literally an architect. Rose didn't pick that job randomly. An architect builds structures that stand on solid foundations, questions weak designs, refuses to sign off on something shaky. Juror 8 does exactly that with the case. He dismantles assumptions brick by brick until only truth can support the verdict. It's a quiet meta-layer. The man who questions the structure of the evidence is the one trained to spot flaws in any build. Look closer at the knife demonstration moment again. When the duplicate switchblade gets plunged into the table, the camera lingers just long enough on the embedded blade to let the symbolism sink in without hammering it. It's not just evidence. It's a visual echo of the alleged crime, a literal stab at certainty. The room goes dead quiet, and in that freeze, every juror confronts the physical reality of violence. Lumet holds the shot to force reflection, no quick cut to diffuse the impact. The film's use of religious undertones sneaks in without ever preaching. Juror 8 enters almost like a calm redeemer in a white shirt amid darker suits, standing alone against the crowd, willing to sacrifice comfort for principle. His persistence echoes a kind of secular grace, offering doubt as salvation rather than condemnation. Even the number 12 carries faint biblical weight. 12 apostles, 12 tribes, 12 men deciding a life or death fate. Rose keeps it understated, letting it resonate subconsciously rather than shout. One production insight that always gets me: Lumet deliberately scheduled a shoot so the actors experienced real mounting fatigue. They filmed in chronological order, and as days dragged on, the heat, the repetition, the confined space wore everyone down naturally. By the late scenes, their irritation, their weariness, their breakthroughs weren't acted, they were felt. Lumet said in later reflections that he wanted the claustrophobia to be authentic, not simulated. "Make the ceiling feel lower, make the walls close in," he explained. "Turn the limitation into the drama's engine." Still riding the wave of everything that makes 12 Angry Men such an enduring powerhouse. We've covered the symbols, the mechanics, the quiet revolutions in that room. Now let's lean into the raw human core that turns this from a great film into something that stays lodged in your chest long after it's over. The beauty of the story lies in its refusal to make any juror a saint or a monster from the start. Everyone walks in carrying their baggage openly or quietly: grudges, insecurities, exhaustion, pride, loneliness. As the hours tick by, those layers peel back, not through dramatic confessions, but through ordinary cracks. A raised voice that suddenly breaks, a hand that trembles when reaching for a cigarette, a glance that lingers too long on someone else's face. These are the moments that remind us justice isn't handed down by perfect people. It's scraped together by imperfect ones who manage, against every instinct, to see each other clearly for just long enough. One of the most haunting elements is how the film shows the cost of staying silent. Several jurors clearly have doubts from the beginning, yet they vote with the crowd because speaking up feels too risky, too exposed. Their eventual shift isn't always triumphant. Sometimes it's reluctant, embarrassed, even ashamed. And that honesty about human weakness makes the whole process feel earned rather than scripted. You believe these men could exist in any courthouse, any city, any decade. The ending isn't fireworks. It's understated, almost ordinary. Men gather their coats, nod awkwardly, step into the hallway, and scatter into the city. Some exchange a quick word, others don't. Life picks up where it left off, but something inside each of them has been quietly rearranged. The film trusts you to feel that rearrangement without spelling it out. No voiceover narration, no closing text crawl, just the sound of footsteps fading and the door clicking shut behind the last man. That's the kind of restraint that elevates everything. Lumet and Rose knew the power wasn't in big revelations, it was in the small. A stubborn insistence on fairness when everything pushes toward convenience. In a single afternoon, 12 strangers prove that empathy isn't weakness, doubt isn't defeat, and listening, really listening, can still bend the arc of a verdict. For anyone recording this, let your voice drop a little softer here, almost confessional. This movie doesn't demand you agree with every argument or every character. It only asks you to sit with the possibility that the person across from you might be right, even when every fiber of you wants to shut them down. And if enough people do that in one room, something extraordinary can happen. 12 Angry Men is proof that cinema at its best doesn't need spectacle to move mountains. It needs truth, time, and the courage to face both. 96 minutes in a sweaty jury room can change how you look at arguments, at strangers, at yourself. That's the final thread I'm leaving you with. Every detail we've explored, the heat, the shadows, the silences, the small human gestures, builds to this one quiet truth. One person's willingness to stand alone can remind 12 others what they're capable of when they choose better. Go watch it again, or watch it for the first time. Feel the room close in, feel the air change, then step outside and carry a little of that clarity with you, pouring every last bit of passion into why 12 Angry Men is the kind of film that doesn't just end when the credits roll, it keeps working on you quietly for days, maybe years. We've traced every technical marvel, every symbolic whisper, every human tremor in that room. Now let's bring it home with the purest reason this movie refuses to age. It treats every single viewer as a juror too. From the opening gavel to the final footsteps on those wet courthouse stairs, the film never lets you off the hook. You're not a passive observer watching 12 strangers decide a boy's fate. You're right there at the table, weighing the same scraps of testimony, the same conflicting stories, the same rush of emotions. Lumet and Rose crafted it so deliberately that by the midpoint, most people catch themselves silently taking sides, mentally arguing back at the screen, feeling their own pulse quicken when someone lands a solid point or fumbles one. That's not accidental. It's the movie doing its deepest job, turning entertainment into personal responsibility. You finish the film and realize you've just spent an hour and a half practicing the hardest civic skill there is, suspending judgment long enough to hear the other side without filtering it through your own anger, fear, or convenience. In 2026, when every notification pings another hot take, another pile-on, another verdict delivered in 30 seconds flat, sitting through this slow, deliberate process feels almost countercultural. It reminds you that truth isn't a popularity contest. It isn't won by the loudest voice or the first story that feels right. It has to survive scrutiny, contradiction, repetition, fatigue. And sometimes the only way it survives is because one person, maybe you, refuses to let the room move on until every reasonable doubt has been faced. Think about how rare that is on screen today. Most stories rush toward resolution, toward catharsis, toward a clean emotional payoff. 12 Angry Men lingers in the discomfort zone on purpose. It lets you feel the drag of indecision, the sting of being wrong, the small victory of admitting it. When a juror finally changes his vote, not with fanfare, but with a quiet, almost embarrassed gesture, the release is massive because it's been withheld for so long. You earn that moment alongside them. That's why people re-watch it obsessively. Each viewing reveals a different juror you identify with more strongly, or one whose blind spot suddenly looks uncomfortably familiar. You notice new lines of dialogue that cut deeper now that life has given you more context. You see how the group's energy ebbs and flows like a real conversation does. Peaks of fury, valleys of exhaustion, and unexpected pockets of connection. It's alive in a way few films manage to stay alive. If there's one sentence I want echoing in your head after this narration ends, it's this. The film doesn't tell you what justice looks like. It shows you what it costs and what it feels like when it's actually done right. So when you sit down with it, don't multitask. Don't check your phone. Let the room get hot. Let the arguments get personal. Let the silences stretch. Let yourself get angry, then doubtful, then hopeful, then relieved, because that's exactly what those 12 men go through and what the movie invites you to experience too. Wrapping this epic journey through 12 Angry Men with the final sparks that make it impossible to walk away unchanged. We've gone through every layer, the heat, the doubt, the silences, but the small human victories. So now, let's land on the one truth that ties it all together and gives your video that perfect closing punch. This film is ultimately a love letter to the act of thinking. Not flashy, genius-level thinking, but the stubborn, everyday kind. Pausing before you agree, asking one more question when everyone wants to leave, refusing to let "that's just how it is" win the day. In 96 minutes, it shows that real intelligence isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about being the one brave enough to admit you might not have it all figured out yet, and then doing something about it. The movie never pretends the system is flawless or that people are easily fixed. It shows fractures everywhere, prejudice slipping out in casual words, memories twisting facts, egos blocking ears. But yet it also shows that even in a room full of those fractures, one steady voice of reason can create enough space for truth to breathe. Not because the voice is loud or perfect, but because it's persistent and honest. That's the quiet revolution at the heart of it all. When the door finally opens and the men step out into the hallway, there's no grand celebration, no swelling strings, no freeze-frame hero shot. Just ordinary guys in rumpled suits walking down wet steps into the city. Some glance back, some don't. Some look a little lighter, some look troubled. The film leaves them, and you, with the same open-ended feeling life gives. Change happened today, but tomorrow is another room, another jury, another chance to get it right or get it wrong. That's why it sticks. It doesn't give you answers on a platter. And it gives you the tools to ask better questions. It gives you the feeling of what it costs to stand up when the easy path is to sit down. And it gives you hope. Not the cheap, feel-good kind, but the hard-earned kind that comes from seeing flawed people choose better, even if only for one afternoon. So when you finally press play, let it take its time. Feel the walls press in. Feel your own opinions wobble. Feel the relief when someone finally sees what you've been seeing. Then, when it's over, sit with the quiet for a second. Ask yourself what you'd have done in that first vote. Ask yourself what you'd do next time someone tries to rush a judgment in real life. Because that's the real gift of 12 Angry Men. It doesn't end in the theater or on your screen. It ends whenever you next find yourself in a conversation where truth is on trial. And if you remember even a fraction of what those 12 men went through, you'll speak a little slower, listen a little longer, and maybe, just maybe, help tip the balance towards something fairer. Carrying this deep love letter to 12 Angry Men all the way to its final, quiet exhale. We've walked every inch of that jury room together. The rising heat, the falling votes, the stubborn hope that one clear mind can still matter. Now, let's close the circle with the simplest, most powerful thing this film leaves behind. The reminder that ordinary people, in ordinary moments, can do something extraordinary. What hits hardest isn't the verdict itself. It's the fact that 12 men who started the day as complete strangers ended it having actually seen each other. Not just as obstacles or allies, but as fathers, sons, immigrants, dreamers, failures, not survivors. The movie never forces big, tearful reconciliations or lifelong friendships. It just shows that for a few hours, barriers cracked open. A bigot heard a young man's story without dismissing it. A grieving father glimpsed his own pain in someone else's rage. An old man felt visible again. Those small openings don't erase who they are outside the room, but they prove the room itself can be a place of temporary grace. That's the miracle Lumet and Rose captured without ever calling it miraculous. They showed that justice isn't only about facts and evidence. It's about people willing to treat each other as fully human, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's painful. In a single sweaty afternoon, they prove the jury system, for all its flaws, can still work when the people inside it choose to rise to it instead of hiding behind it. And here's the part that keeps me coming back. The film doesn't end with certainty that the world got fixed. It ends with the world still spinning, still messy, still full of the same prejudices and pressures. But it ends with 12 men who, for today at least, did their best not to let those things win completely. That's not a Hollywood ending. It's a human one. It's hopeful without being naive, triumphant without being triumphant. So when the screen goes dark and the credits roll silent over those empty chairs, don't rush to turn it off. Stay there for 10 seconds. Feel the absence of the voices that filled the last hour and a half. Feel how heavy the quiet is now that the storm has passed. Then ask yourself the question the movie has been whispering the whole time. If I were called to that room tomorrow, would I have the patience to doubt? The courage to speak? The humility to change? Because 12 Angry Men isn't really about a murder trial from 1957. It's about every trial we face whenever we have to decide what's true, what's fair, who's worth believing. It's about the conversations we avoid, the assumptions we protect, the moments we could choose differently, and sometimes do. This film is proof that a story told with absolute economy, absolute honesty, and absolute faith in its audience can outlast every trend, every budget, every era. 96 minutes of 12 men talking in one room changed how we think about dialogue on screen, about group dynamics, about moral responsibility. And if it changes even one viewer, if it makes even one person pause before judging, listen before speaking, stand up before sitting down, then it has done more than entertain. It has done what the best art does. It has made the world a tiny bit less quick to condemn. That's the legacy. That's why you need to watch it, why you need to share it, why you need to let it sit with you. Not as a relic from the 50s, but as a living challenge from right now. Your narrator's still right here with you, letting this celebration of 12 Angry Men stretch out one last time because, honestly, this film deserves every extra breath we can give it. We've circled every corner of the room, felt every drop of sweat, heard every chair scrape against the floor, and now let's linger just a little longer on what makes the experience linger in your own life long after you've left that jury table behind. Anyway, the real genius of the whole thing is how it turns a supposedly dry procedural process, jury deliberation, into something profoundly intimate and alive. What starts as 12 strangers reading from the same script of evidence slowly becomes 12 individual lives colliding in real time. You watch personalities rub against each other like stones in a river. Some smooth out, some chip away at others, some stay stubbornly jagged. And through all of it, no one ever becomes a caricature. The prejudiced man isn't just a villain to boo. He's a product of his era, his upbringing, his hurts, and when his certainty finally cracks, it's not triumphant music that plays. It's the small, human sound of someone realizing they've been wrong in a way that matters. That kind of moment doesn't need fireworks. It needs silence, and the film gives it plenty. What keeps pulling people back decade after decade is the way the movie refuses to let you stay comfortable. It forces you to sit through the boredom of the early votes, the frustration of circular arguments, the embarrassment of being called out on your own bias, the quiet pride of seeing someone else finally understand. By the time the last holdout softens, not because he was bullied, but because the weight of reason became too heavy to ignore, you feel it in your own chest, not as catharsis handed to you, but as something you helped earn just by paying attention. That's rare. Most films spoon-feed emotion. This one makes you work for it, and the payoff feels earned in your bones. Think about how many conversations you've had in your own life that could have used a little more of what happens in that room. Someone states an opinion like it's fact, everyone nods along because it's easier, and the moment passes. But what if one person had simply said, "Wait, I'm not sure. Can we talk about this again?" What if that one question had slowed everything down long enough for doubt to do its quiet work? The film doesn't promise that every argument ends in enlightenment, but it shows that the possibility exists whenever someone cares enough to insist on it. And in a world that moves faster every year, where opinions solidify in seconds and apologies feel like defeat, that insistence starts to look almost heroic. The beauty is in the smallness of it all. No one saves the world. No one gets a medal. A life might be spared, or it might not. We're left to wonder just like they are. But 12 men walk out knowing they didn't take the shortcut. They didn't let fatigue or peer pressure or personal grudges close the case prematurely. They stayed until the evidence, the logic, the humanity added up to something they could live with. And that's the quiet power that echoes. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like staying in a hot room longer than anyone wants to, asking one more question, listening one more time, changing your mind when everything in you screams not to. So let this be the final invitation in your narration. Tell your listeners to find a quiet evening, turn off every distraction, press play, and commit to the full ride. Let the opening courtroom scene wash over them like routine. Let the first vote feel predictable. Let the slow unraveling pull them in deeper than they expected. Let the heat build until they're shifting in their own chair. Let the silences stretch until they feel awkward in real life. And when the last man leaves the room, let them sit with the screen dark for a moment, breathing in the same cleared air those jurors finally got to breathe. Because 12 Angry Men isn't just a movie about a trial from another time. It's a mirror held up to every time we have to decide what's true, who's believable, what matters most. It's a reminder that 12 ordinary people, with all their flaws, tempers, fears, and blind spots, can still reach something close to justice if they refuse to let the easy path win. And if that doesn't make you want to watch it right now, nothing will. Your narrator still sitting with you in that same jury room? Because 12 Angry Men is the rare film that doesn't let you leave easily, even after the lights come up and the world outside rushes back in. We've traced its every heartbeat, from the first uncertain vote to the last quiet step into the hallway. And now, let's rest on what this masterpiece ultimately asks of anyone who dares to watch it fully: to carry a piece of that room with you into your own life. Imagine for a second that the deliberation never really ends. The movie hands you the same tools those 12 men had. No more, no less. A single life hanging in the balance, a pile of testimony that looks solid until someone shines a different light on it. A group of people who are all certain they're right until certainty starts to crack under pressure. The film doesn't solve the case for you. It equips you to question any case that comes your way, whether it's a courtroom drama on the news, a heated family argument, a workplace decision that feels too rushed, or even your own snap judgment scrolling through feeds late at night. It trains you, quietly and relentlessly, to ask the questions nobody else wants to hear. Is this really beyond reasonable doubt? Have we listened to every angle? Are we deciding based on facts or on what feels easiest to believe? That's why the runtime feels so perfectly calibrated. Not a minute too long, not a second wasted. Every extra breath in the dialogue, every lingering close-up on a face that's starting to doubt itself, every scrape of a chair as someone shifts uncomfortably, builds the same pressure the jurors feel. You don't just observe their struggle, you share it. When your own mind starts racing ahead, predicting objections, weighing counterpoints, feeling the frustration when someone doubles down on a weak point, and when a breakthrough finally arrives, not with a bang, but with a small, almost reluctant admission, the relief floods through you the same way it does through the room. It's shared catharsis, earned together, and that's a feeling movies rarely deliver anymore. What makes the ending so hauntingly beautiful is its refusal to tie everything up in a bow. We don't get to see the aftermath. We don't know if the acquitted young man rebuilds his life or if the jurors ever speak again. We don't even get confirmation that the system worked perfectly. All we get is the knowledge that, for one fragile afternoon, 12 flawed humans chose the harder path over the convenient one. And they chose patience over speed, listening over shouting, humility over pride. And in choosing that, they proved it's possible, even when the odds, the heat, the exhaustion, and human nature itself are stacked against it. So here's the final invitation, the one that turns this narration from information into something personal. When you watch 12 Angry Men, don't treat it like background noise or a quick classic checkoff. Treat it like a summons. Clear your schedule, dim the lights, sit somewhere quiet, and stay with it, start to finish. Let the opening instructions from the judge wash over you like routine paperwork. Let the first unanimous vote feel almost comforting in its predictability. Then let the slow erosion begin. Feel your own certainty waver as theirs does. Feel the room grow smaller, the air thicker, the stakes heavier. And when the last vote flips, when the weight finally lifts, don't move right away. Stay seated. Let the silence settle. Let the echo of those final footsteps fade. Then ask yourself, honestly, if I were juror 8 tomorrow, would I have had the nerve to stand alone at the beginning? And if I were one of the others, would I have had the grace to change when the evidence demanded it? Because this isn't just a story about a trial in 1957. It's a standing challenge to every moment we face where truth is contested, where groupthink tempts us, where rushing feels safer than slowing down. It's proof that one person's quiet insistence on fairness can ripple outward and change everything, even if only for a little while. And in a time when certainty sells faster than doubt, when outrage drowns out reason, that proof feels more necessary than ever. Letting this deep, unhurried love for 12 angry men keep unfolding. Because the truth is, no matter how many times we circle back to it, the film always has one more quiet thing to say. We've felt the heat rise, watched the votes shift like tectonic plates, listened to the silences that scream louder than any shout, and now let's settle into the afterglow, the part that happens long after the screen fades and the room empties. What stays with you most isn't the plot mechanics or the clever twists of evidence. It's the slow, almost invisible transformation of how these men look at each other. At the start, they're just faces around a table. The impatient one checking his watch, the loud one dominating the space, the quiet one shrinking into his chair, the angry one radiating heat like a furnace. By the end, and those same faces have softened in places, hardened in others, revealed lines of weariness or unexpected kindness. They haven't become different people overnight, but they've seen each other in a way they never would have if the day had gone the way everyone expected. That shift, from strangers judging a stranger to humans recognizing other humans, is the film's truest miracle. It happens without speeches about brotherhood, without anyone hugging it out. It happens because someone kept asking questions until the answers couldn't be ignored anymore. And here's what makes it so powerful in our own time. The movie understands that changing a mind isn't about winning an argument. It's about creating the conditions where someone can afford to lose one. Pride has to be given an off-ramp. Fear has to be met with patience instead of counterattack. And exhaustion has to be shared rather than weaponized. The film shows every ugly stage of that process, the defensiveness, the sarcasm, the sudden flashes of vulnerability, and never looks away. It lets us see how hard it is to admit, I was wrong, especially when the stakes feel personal, when admitting doubt means rewriting your own story about how the world works. Yet when it finally happens, even in the smallest way, the room feels bigger, the air feels lighter, and you realize the ceiling wasn't actually lowering, it was just perception making it feel that way. This is why people don't just like the film, they carry it. They quote lines in real arguments years later. They remember a particular close-up when someone else's stubbornness reminds them of a family dinner gone sideways. They catch themselves pausing mid-sentence in a heated discussion thinking, wait, what if I'm the one rushing this? It's not that the movie turns anyone into a saint. It's that it plants a small, stubborn seed of self-doubt, the good kind, that grows whenever life puts you in a position to judge, to decide, to speak up or stay silent. In a world that rewards certainty and speed, 12 Angry Men quietly insists that slowness can be strength, that uncertainty can be wisdom, that one dissenting voice isn't noise, it's sometimes the only signal worth hearing. So, if there's one last thing to leave your listeners with before the narration fades out, let it be this. Watch this film not to be entertained in the usual way, but to be reminded what real conversation can still achieve when people treat each other as equals who might actually be right. Then watch it to feel what it's like when reason wins, not because it shouted loudest, but because it refused to stop whispering. Watch it to remember that justice, fairness, truth, these things aren't automatic. They have to be fought for in hot, stuffy rooms by tired people who would rather be anywhere else. And sometimes, against every odd, they win. That's the enduring fire of 12 Angry Men. A black and white film from 1957 that still burns brighter than most things made today because it believes in us, in our capacity to listen, to question, to change, even when we give ourselves every excuse not to. Your narrator still right here with you, unwilling to let the door of that jury room swing shut just yet, because 12 Angry Men has one more gentle, persistent way of staying alive in your mind long after the final scene dissolves. And we've felt the temperature climb, heard the arguments echo off the walls, watched certainty crumble like old plaster, and now let's sit in the quiet that follows. Not the empty quiet of an abandoned set, but the full, thoughtful quiet that settles when something important has finally been said and heard. One of the film's most enduring gifts is how it redefines what victory looks like. There are no triumphant speeches, no swelling orchestral finish, no freeze frame of heroic faces. Victory here is measured in millimeters, a single vote changing after hours of resistance, a hand unclenching on the table, a pair of eyes that finally meet another pair without accusation. It's the smallest possible shift, yet it carries the weight of a life spared, a conscience cleared, a principle upheld. The movie understands that real change rarely arrives in dramatic waves. It arrives in reluctant drips, one mind opening a crack, then another, until the room no longer feels like a pressure cooker, but like a space where breathing is possible again. And because it shows that process so honestly, without shortcuts or sentimentality, you walk away believing it's achievable. Not easy, not guaranteed, but possible. What lingers even longer is the film's faith in ordinary decency. These aren't crusaders or philosophers or larger-than-life figures. They're a baseball fan in a hurry, a meek bank clerk who hates confrontation, a garage owner hardened by years of resentment, a watchmaker who came to this country with nothing but hope, an old man who has outlived most of the people who ever listened to him. Or yet in the crucible of that single afternoon, ordinary decency becomes extraordinary. Not because they were special, but because they chose, not once, but repeatedly, to act as if the stranger whose fate they held mattered more than their own comfort, their own schedule, their own wounded pride. That choice turns them, for a fleeting moment, into something better than they walked in as. And the film never lets you forget that the capacity for that choice lives in every one of us, waiting for the right pressure to bring it out. In our own lives, we rarely get a neatly contained jury room with a clear beginning and end. Our deliberations spill across days, weeks, years, family decisions, friendships tested, public opinions formed in comment threads, judgments passed in silence before we even speak them aloud. But the principles the film plants stay the same. Slow down when the crowd wants to rush, question when agreement feels too comfortable, listen when anger makes listening feel like surrender, stand alone when standing together would be simpler. 12 Angry Men doesn't promise you'll always win those moments. It only promises that showing up for them, with patience, with honesty, with a willingness to be wrong, is never wasted. So let this be the closing note that echoes as your narration winds down. Tell your listeners that this isn't a film you finish and file away. It's one you finish and then carry, like a small, steady compass you pull out whenever life puts you in a position to decide something that matters. Whenever someone states a fact, everyone else accepts without question. Whenever a quick verdict feels satisfying but hollow. Whenever doubt creeps in and you wonder if you're the only one feeling it. Remember that room. Remember the man in the white shirt who simply said not guilty when 11 others said the opposite. Remember how long it took, how painful it was, how fragile the progress felt. And remember that he didn't need to be right about everything. He only needed to be right about one thing. That certainty without examination is dangerous. That's the heartbeat that keeps 12 Angry Men beating stronger with every passing year. A modest black and white picture from another era that still speaks louder than most modern spectacles because it trusts you to care about ideas, about people, about the hard work of getting it right. Watch it, feel it. Let it change the way you enter your next argument, your next decision, your next moment of doubt. Because if 12 tired, flawed men can find their way to something close to justice in one stifling afternoon, then maybe, just maybe, the rest of us can too. One careful question at a time. Your narrator still right here with you, letting this conversation with 12 angry men stretch out one more time because the film has that rare quality of never quite feeling finished. It keeps whispering long after the last juror has left the building and the rain has stopped drumming on the windows. We've lived in that room through every rising argument, every falling doubt, every small crack in certainty. And now, let's rest on the final, almost invisible gift it leaves behind. The quiet permission to be uncertain in a world that punishes uncertainty. The movie never once pretends that doubt is comfortable or easy. From the moment Juror 8 raises his hand alone, he becomes the target. Mocked, questioned, pressured, dismissed. Yet he doesn't defend his position with fireworks or superior knowledge. He defends it with patience, with one careful question after another, with the simple refusal to vote guilty until the evidence survives real scrutiny. That act of sustained uncertainty isn't heroic in the Hollywood sense. It's unglamorous, exhausting, lonely. But the film shows, step by painful step, how that loneliness eventually creates space for others to breathe their own doubts into the open. One by one, men who were ready to send a boy to his death start to admit they aren't sure. Not because they were convinced by brilliant debate, but because someone gave them room to feel unsure without shame. And that's the deepest revolution in the room, turning "I'm not sure" from a weakness into a strength. What makes this so resonant now is how foreign that feels in everyday life. We live in an age where hesitation gets labeled as weakness, where "I don't know" is something to apologize for, where the fastest opinion wins the most attention. Yet 12 Angry Men stands as quiet proof that the opposite can be true, that the person who says wait when everyone else says go isn't holding things up. They're holding things together. They're protecting the possibility that truth might still be hiding in the details nobody wants to look at twice. And when the group finally arrives at a place of shared reasonable doubt, it's not a victory over anyone, it's a victory over haste, over assumption, over the lazy comfort of consensus. The ending carries that same gentle insistence on imperfection. As the men file out, there's no group hug, no promise they'll stay in touch, no dramatic music telling you everything is resolved forever. Some walk away changed in ways they'll never fully articulate. Others walk away carrying the same old baggage they brought in. A few might even regret softening their stance later when life gets hard again. The film doesn't hide that reality. It embraces it. Because real moral progress isn't a straight line to enlightenment. It's a series of small, uneven steps forward, interrupted by backslides, powered by people who choose to keep stepping anyway. So if this narration has done its job, it leaves you with more than facts about a 1957 movie. It leaves you with a small, stubborn inner voice that might speak up next time you feel the pressure to agree too quickly. It leaves you with the memory of how a single hand raised in a hot room can start a chain reaction of clearer thinking. It leaves you understanding that justice, fairness, truth, these aren't things we achieve once and for all. They're things we have to keep choosing, keep defending, keep questioning, one conversation at a time. That's why 12 Angry Men never ages out of relevance. It's not about a specific case from the 50s. It's about the case we all face whenever we have to decide something that matters to someone else's life, liberty, or dignity. It's about the courage it takes to say, "Not yet," when the crowd is shouting, "Done." And it's about the quiet hope that if enough of us practice that courage, even imperfectly, even reluctantly, the rooms we find ourselves in might become just a little less dangerous, a little more human. The deepest truth this movie carries is that fairness isn't a state we arrive at. It's a practice we have to keep returning to. Those 12 men didn't become flawless overnight. They didn't leave the room suddenly enlightened about every prejudice or blind spot they carried in with them. What they did was commit, for one exhausting afternoon, to the hard, unglamorous work of trying. They tried to separate fact from feeling, evidence from assumption, anger from argument. They tried to hear what was actually being said instead of what they wanted to hear. And even when they failed at it, because they did fail repeatedly, they kept trying until the failures added up to something closer to the truth than where they started. But that's not inspiring in a feel-good, motivational poster way. It's inspiring in the real, gritty way that life actually works. Progress comes from stubborn persistence, not from perfection. What stays with you longest is how the film honors the cost of that persistence. No one gets a pat on the back. No one gets thanked by name. The young defendant they may have saved never appears to express gratitude. The old man who finally found his voice walks out into the hallway alone. The angry father who raged the loudest leaves carrying whatever pain he brought in, perhaps a little lighter, perhaps not. The movie doesn't reward them with closure or applause. It simply shows them stepping back into ordinary life. Coats on, ties loosened, rain slowing to a drizzle, and lets you decide what that step meant. It trusts you to understand that sometimes the biggest victories are the ones nobody else ever sees. The internal shift, the quiet admission of error, the decision to value a stranger's life more than your own ego. In the years since 1957, the world has changed in ways those jurors could never have imagined. Faster communication, louder voices, shorter attention spans, more ways to form instant judgments without ever facing the person on the other side. Yet the film's questions remain untouched by time. What happens when we stop asking why? What happens when we let convenience trump caution? What happens when one person decides the majority isn't automatically right? 12 Angry Men doesn't give easy answers because easy answers aren't the point. The point is the asking itself, the willingness to sit with discomfort, to endure the friction of conflicting views, to hold space for doubt until doubt does its slow, necessary work. So, as this narration finally winds toward its close, let it end not with a grand statement, but with a simple, personal one. This film isn't here to tell you how to think. It's here to show you what thinking feels like when it's done with real stakes and real people. Watch it when you're tired, when you're angry, when you're certain you're right about something. Watch it when the news cycle is screaming one verdict and your gut is whispering another. Watch it when someone you love is digging in on an opinion that scares you. Let it remind you that changing a mind, yours or someone else's, isn't about being smarter or louder. It's about being willing to stay in the room a little longer, ask one more question, listen one more time, or even when every instinct says it's time to leave. 12 Angry Men is a small, black and white miracle that proves big things can still happen in confined spaces with limited tools. 12 chairs, one table, a broken fan, a lot of words, and just enough courage to keep going. It proves that conversation, when treated as sacred rather than as sport, can still bend reality towards something fairer. And if a film from nearly 70 years ago can still make us feel that possibility so vividly, then maybe the possibility itself hasn't gone anywhere. Maybe it's waiting in the next room we enter, the next argument we have, the next moment we choose to stand up instead of sit down. The most haunting thing about the whole experience is how ordinary the heroism feels. No one in that room is trying to be a hero. And no one is chasing glory or legacy or even personal vindication. Juror 8 doesn't stand up because he wants to be remembered. He stands up because he can't live with himself if he doesn't. The others don't change their votes because they're suddenly converted to a noble cause. They change because the weight of their own conscience finally becomes heavier than the weight of the group's disapproval. The film never romanticizes that struggle. It shows the sweat, the irritation, the petty jabs, the moments of near collapse. Yet, in showing all of that unglamorous mess, it makes the eventual shift toward justice feel more real, more attainable, more urgent than any polished inspirational tale ever could. What keeps echoing in your head days later is the realization that the jury room isn't some special, an isolated place. It's every place where decisions get made about other people's lives. It's the family dinner where one relative's story gets dismissed because that's just how they are. It's the group chat where a rumor spreads unchecked because no one wants to be the buzzkill who asks for proof. It's the meeting where the easy consensus wins because challenging it would take too much energy. 12 Angry Men doesn't preach that you have to fight every battle. It simply shows what can happen when someone decides one battle is worth fighting and keeps fighting it with calm, steady, almost boring persistence. Not rage, not brilliance, just persistence. And that persistence, unglamorous as it is, turns out to be the most powerful force in the room. The movie also leaves you with a strange, bittersweet tenderness toward its characters. All right, you don't end up loving all of them. Some remain unlikable, even in their final moments. But you understand them. You see how their anger or fear or exhaustion isn't abstract. It's rooted in real losses, real scars, real years of carrying things they never asked to carry. When the bigoted juror finally breaks down, it's not a tidy redemption arc. It's a raw, ugly unraveling of someone who's been hiding behind certainty for so long that letting it go hurts physically. The film doesn't judge him for that. It just lets him be human in his brokenness. And in doing so, it lets you extend the same grace to the characters, to the people in your own life, maybe even to yourself on days when your own certainty feels like armor you don't know how to take off. So as this narration finally begins to settle, let it leave you with this one last, simple invitation. Treat your next watch of 12 Angry Men like a kind of rehearsal. Not for a courtroom, but for whatever room you find yourself in tomorrow or next week or next year, when something important hangs in the balance and the easy path is to nod along. Practice staying when you'd rather leave. Practice asking when you'd rather assume. Practice listening when you'd rather speak. Practice changing your mind when pride screams not to. The film doesn't expect you to win every time. It only asks that you show up willing to try, and that you remember it's okay if trying looks messy, tired, imperfect. Because messy, tired, imperfect trying is still trying. And sometimes that's enough to tip the scales. Those 12 men start the day as archetypes. The hothead, the follower, the cynic, the dreamer, the weary old soul. And by the end, they're still those things, but they've been forced to see through each other's eyes for just long enough to remember that behind every opinion is a story that hurts. The garage owner's bigotry doesn't vanish in a puff of smoke. It cracks open because someone finally asked him what happened to make him so afraid. The grieving father's rage doesn't disappear. It softens when he realizes the boy on trial might be carrying the same invisible wounds he once carried. The film never demands forgiveness or sudden enlightenment. It simply shows what happens when people are made to sit across from each other long enough that dehumanizing becomes harder than humanizing. And in that small, hard-won shift, from seeing them to seeing him, lies the film's most profound hope. That prejudice, fear, and certainty can be worn down, not by force, but by sustained, patient attention to another person's reality. What makes this feel so vital right now is how rare that kind of attention has become. We scroll past lives in seconds, form opinions from headlines, cancel, or crown people based on fragments. Yet 12 Angry Men insists, without ever raising its voice, that real judgment requires time, proximity, repetition, contradiction. It requires looking at the same evidence from multiple angles until the cracks show. It requires admitting that your first instinct might be wrong, not because you're stupid, but because you're human. And it requires the courage to say so out loud when the room would rather move on. The movie doesn't promise that this process will always succeed, or that everyone will leave transformed. It only shows that when it does happen, even partially, and even imperfectly, it saves something irreplaceable: a life, a conscience, a sliver of trust in each other. The final walk down those courthouse steps is the film's quiet masterpiece. No dialogue, no score swelling to tell you how to feel. Just men in damp suits stepping into the same city they left hours earlier, but carrying something new inside them. Maybe relief, maybe regret, maybe nothing more than the knowledge that today they didn't take the shortcut. One man pauses at the bottom of the stairs, looks up at the clearing sky, then walks off alone. Another lights a cigarette and disappears into the crowd. The old man who spoke last smiles faintly to himself as he fades from view. They're not heroes in capes. They're just people who did their job when it counted, and the film lets that be enough. No need for more. No need for applause. And just the ordinary dignity of having tried. So here's the last soft invitation this narration can offer. Let 12 Angry Men be more than a movie you watch once. Let it be a memory you return to whenever life puts you in a position to decide something about someone else's fate, big or small. When the group is leaning one way and your gut is leaning another, remember the man who raised his hand alone. When anger fills the air and reason feels drowned out, remember the silences that eventually broke through. When changing your mind feels like losing face, remember that the men who changed theirs walked out taller, not smaller. Let the film live in your back pocket like a quiet reminder that fairness isn't automatic, that doubt isn't defeat, that one voice, calm, consistent, unafraid, can still matter more than all the noise combined.